The monitoring displays inside the Obsidian registry did not record her pulse as an anomaly. They merely tracked a flat, steady rhythm of 44 beats per cycle. Archivist Myra Sterling sat motionless before the primary console, her fingers moving across the cold metal inputs with unhurried precision. She was small, thin, and entirely devoid of the thick armor plates that defined every other high-ranking official within the Oakhaven cryovault. Every 3 minutes, her eyes blinked with a strange, double pulsation that seemed to delay the closing of her lids. It was a rhythmic habit, a small biological oddity that the automated system flagged as a harmless data tremor. The surrounding air was dense and smelled heavily of recycled iron, a rich mixture designed to keep the heavy-cast clerks from suffocating under the high gravitational pull of the station. No light from the ceiling, no warmth from the vents, no sound from the halls. The registry felt less like a workspace and more like a tomb carved out of a frozen asteroid, where every species was measured by how much weight their outer shell could bear. The Directorate spent 40 generations building walls against the pressure. You will want to see what happened when they met someone who lived under it. A low chime echoed from the main entrance, and the heavy pneumatic tracks slid open to admit a massive shape. High Overseer Malakurgen moved into the chamber, his 3-meter frame clad in a dual-layered exoskeleton of calcified silicate plates that clacked sharply against the deck. He held an ornate ivory ledger key in his upper primary grooming hook, its surface etched with the administrative sigils of 45 governed star systems. His 6 compound eyes shifted from violet to a dull, smoky gray as he focused on the human woman. To his people, a species without a visible shell was an evolutionary error. An unfinished thing meant only for light logistics or planetary surface curation. He let out a resonant subvocal hum that rattled the light storage racks against the wall, a clear sign of his deep dissatisfaction with the morning's data yields. The ancient database logs from the deep expansion sector had arrived early that morning, containing the raw baseline atmosphere metrics for the human home system. The official registry indicated a surface pressure of 1.4 bars, a number that Malakurgen had already marked with a red compliance flag. To the chitinous Directorate, a soft-skinned creature surviving in such light, unpressurized conditions was a mathematical contradiction. They assumed the human diplomatic corps had padded the numbers to hide a structural weakness. "The numbers are a fabrication, archivist," Malakurgen said, his voice coming through his vocal plates like grinding stones. "Your flesh would liquefy under the true testing parameters of our primary military cohorts, yet these logs claim your lungs can stabilize without a secondary pressure suit." Myra did not turn her head from the console. Instead, her hand moved down to touch the inside of her left sleeve, where a dull, oxidized copper insignia badge was pinned securely out of sight. Her thumb traced the rough, scratch-serrated edges of the old metal, using the familiar physical sting to focus her thoughts. The badge smelled faintly of parched, mineral-heavy dirt, a scent that had long vanished from the sterilized air of the space station. "The data is correct, High Overseer," she said, her voice completely flat and devoid of the subvocal deference the giant expected. "Human respiratory tolerance is nonlinear. The reports you are reviewing are surface averages, not structural maximums." Malakurgen stepped closer, his heavy weight causing the floor plating to dip slightly beneath his feet. "An average is a law," he rumbled. "The Vrenthal auditors have already signed the daily ledger, and they agree that your species lacks the bone density to maintain operational status in Subsector 12. You will submit to an immediate physical pressure audit, or I will nullify your sector clearance before the cycle ends." The threat was clear, but Myra's dual pulsating blink merely slowed down. The central monitors showed her heart rate remained perfectly steady, an icy flat line that defied the massive alien's presence. She knew the rules of the hegemony. If a species could not withstand the natural baselines of a testing facility without mechanical aid, they were stripped of their administrative titles and reduced to labor property. The Overseer reached across the console, his massive silicate hook hovering over the environmental override switch. With a swift, high-handed motion, he inserted his ivory ledger key into the primary lock and turned it clockwise, sealing the registry doors from the inside. The heavy titanium seals dropped into place with a series of dull metallic thuds that vibrated through the floorboards. The automated warning lights began to flash a pale, warning amber. Malakurgen was not permitted to alter chamber baselines without a full board of auditors present, but his hubris was absolute, backed by generations of physical dominance over every soft life form in the sector. "We will find your true decimal point," the Overseer said, his 6 eyes widening as he adjusted the room's atmospheric compression valve. The air scrubbers changed their pitch from a low hum to a high, straining whine. Within seconds, the air inside the Obsidian registry began to thicken, the moisture in the room condensing into a fine gray fog that clung to the cold glass surfaces. The gravity stabilizers groaned as the system forced more mass into the sealed space, increasing the atmospheric density toward an unprecedented level. Myra did not move from her seat, though her fingers quietly let go of her digital reading stylus. She watched the primary readout climb past 2 bars, then 3, then 4. Across the room, 2 Vrenthal clerks who had been updating the lower data ledgers began to sway. Their slender, multi-jointed limbs trembled under the sudden weight of the thickening air, their translucent skin turning a deep, bruised purple as their internal fluid circulation struggled to counter the external load. One of them dropped his ledger tablet, the plastic shattering against the reinforced steel floor. They had the mathematical minds of universal auditors, but their bodies had no ancestral memory of weight. Myra slowly stood up from her chair, her knees locking into place without the slightest hint of tremor. Her hand went back to the hidden copper insignia badge inside her sleeve, her fingers pressing into the old metal until her skin turned white. The biometric telemetry on the wall was flashing wildly now, sending frantic alerts to the central command deck, but the room itself was entirely isolated by the Overseer's override. The air was so thick now that it felt like moving through a liquid medium. The sulfur tang of overworked cooling lines drifted from the wall vents, filling the room with a sharp chemical stench. Malak-Ergen stood in the center of the chamber, his heavy chest heaving as he drew in the dense gas. He believed his calcified armor would protect him from the shift, but his joint seals were already beginning to weep a clear, yellowish fluid. His silicate plates, designed to resist rapid kinetic impacts, were never engineered for a sustained, crushing weight from all sides simultaneously. A loud, wet crack echoed through the room as one of his secondary grooming hooks snapped under the tension of his own hardening musculature. The Overseer stumbled backward, his 6 eyes clouding over with a pale gray film of pain. He tried to reach for the ivory ledger key to reverse the valve, but his primary arms were locked in a calcified spasm, his joints fusing under the rapid atmospheric shift he had initiated. He looked toward the console, expecting to see the human woman collapsed on the floor, her soft skin torn by internal hemorrhaging. Instead, Myra Sterling walked toward him. Her movements were not slow. They were perfectly measured, her boots striking the metal floor with a solid, deliberate force that seemed to ignore the crushing weight of the room. The air was turning to stone for everyone else, but her chest was expanding in deep, slow, low-frequency cycles that matched the rhythm of her strange, dual blink. Before hitting the final compression override on the panel, she reached down with absolute calmness, adjusted the angle of her digital reading stylus, and cleared a minor system alert that had been blocking the historical archive view. Then the structural glass of the observation deck groaned as the atmospheric pressure spiked by 40%, instantly bringing the massive silicate alien overseers to their knees. Through the condensing fog, Myra Sterling remains perfectly upright, walking calmly through the crushing air to deliver a quiet historical correction to the suffocating administration. The facility computers did not register a biological failure in her systems. They simply recorded that her pulmonary pressure had calibrated downward to meet the environment, her cellular oxygen levels rising into an optimal resting state. No panic in her eyes, no struggle in her chest, no weakness in her stance. She stood over the fallen overseer, her shadow falling across his clouded ocular lenses as he wallowed in the dense, unyielding fog. The Directorate spent 40 generations building walls against the pressure. High Overseer, Myra said, her voice cutting through the hiss of the pneumatic valves with a chilling, quiet clarity. You evaluated my people by the thickness of our skin, completely blind to the fact that our lineage was forged in the core of a dying world. My ancestors did not live under the sky. They spent 3 centuries in the deep-crust mines of a subterranean world, learning how to breathe the weight of an entire mountain just to keep their bones together. Malak-Ergen could only let out a wet, rattling wheeze as his primary chest plates began to splinter from the sheer density of the air he had trapped inside his own lungs. He had measured worth by scale, never realizing that true endurance is an internal structural characteristic, hidden deep within the engineering of the cell. The central computer, finally overriding the local lock after detecting a critical structural threat to the station's hull, blew the auxiliary release valves. A massive gust of wind roared through the registry as the excess pressure was sucked into the secondary ballast tanks, leaving the room suddenly cold, quiet, and thin. The heavy alien guards lay scattered across the deck like fallen stone statues, their joints leaking and their pride utterly shattered. They adjusted the logs, they moved the sensors, they rewrote the rules. Within 3 cycles, the Chitinous Directorate issued an immediate administrative decree, permanently revoking all environmental testing protocols for human personnel across all multisystem installations. Human habitats were officially recategorized from low-density hazard zones to permanent atmospheric anchors, their structural metrics used as the new baseline for extreme planetary survival. High Overseer Malakurjan was quietly stripped of his ledger key and reassigned to an outer border watch station on an airless moon, his cracked silicate armor a permanent reminder of his calculation error. Myra Sterling remained in the registry, her workspace now completely clear of the heavy cast oversight. She reached inside her sleeve, unpinned the old copper insignia badge, and walked over to the central environmental sensor housing. The cold metal didn't absorb the frost of the vault. It remained exactly as warm as the hand holding it. She placed the badge directly onto the sensor grid, locking it into the core calibration loop, where its ancient, parched soil composition would forever dictate the weight of the air. A lone green light blinked on the console. The gray fog outside the high window cleared, revealing the silent, jagged ring of the outer asteroid field spinning in the dark.